Did Kenshin ruin the meta, or is it just the shiny new toy problem like we've seen previously with Roy Mustang in Union Arena? In today's video, we're going to be covering the top 32 list from the most recent core TCG regional and giving my thoughts on the meta overall and what it means for, honestly, the next few sets that we have coming up. So with that out of the way, let's dive in. So yes, up front, we do have to acknowledge that this does look a little bit scary, right? We do have the top 32 results where it was overwhelmingly Kenshin. Now, it was red and purple, so at least two different decks, but this is very much, in my opinion, the shiny new toy problem. Much like we've seen with the Roy Mustang deck, where it was very popular at Gen Con, now we do have both a very powerful deck, but a new release playing a combination role here for what we saw with the core TCG regional. Now, I do want to highlight that we did expect this going into the event, so I think that was also compounding the issue of just even more people trying to play it. But looking ahead to future set releases with both Yu Yu Hakusho and Kaiju number 8 at the end of this month, and honestly the biggest note, right, is Sword Art Volume 2 right around the corner with the purple Unideck, we are really just entering what I'm just going to call the second year or second wave of Union Arena metas. I think it's very clear and intentional at this point that the devs have decided no longer are we going to try to restrict or remove sets or hold things back from the JP meta, and instead just get us as caught up as possible with respects to not getting every single IP. Like Macross is probably not coming over here, even though it's another tier 1 deck, as just one of those examples. So we will just be seeing what are the newest announcements, like for another example, solo leveling coming up. These will probably just be very strong decks, or even Galleon being another one that is doing likely very well right now, just based on the couple early results we have in Japan, and will continue to be very, very strong. So yes, I do want to stress that this can look a little scary up front and definitely be a bit off-putting. I can definitely understand a lot of the hesitation around seeing a top 32 result like this, but I think this is overall just a scenario where we are finally ripping off the Band-Aid, going forward with Union Arena, and by, a couple months once we get more releases, this is definitely going to look a lot more very like we had seen previously coming out of the Dallas event, which was a great time. And again, tons of different deck varieties. Even if Roy Mustang was probably still the most popular deck in the room, now we had Kenshin being the clear favorite IP at the core TCG regional. So again, I think that does play a bias here, and I'd be very curious to see how the next few regionals line up. Now, beyond that, I do want to take a moment here and reflect on some of the other lists that we're also going to be talking about. And I want to give one more shout out here before we get into the actual list themselves for Eggman, who is going to be covering Union Arena once more. And I just want to give a special shout out because they have the best deck image exporter that I can actually read the cards, and they're readable for this video, especially if you're on mobile and wanting to zoom in and stuff. So that's been a big deal that was missing for me. So shout out to Eggman. Make sure you give his website some love. And it does sound like some tournaments are also going to be coming back here in the near future. So definitely look forward to that. Of course, got to give a shout out to the Draw 3 guys who have been holding it down, but it sounds like there might be a partnership in the future between Draw 3, GG Haven, and Eggman for hosting some like bigger online events, because again, our regionals keep selling out. So clearly there is a competitive demand for this game, and I think just having an online scene can be really important. So with that out of the way, let's dive in and actually talk about the list. Now, as always, I'm just going to cover the top placing archetype list, right? For the first case, we have Milo with the red Kenchin. But if you want to see all the deck lists for every single variant, maybe you're trying to figure out what are the right numbers, especially with the red and purple Kenshin decks because they just come out recently, then I will have a link down below to Eggman's site where you can see the full top 32 breakdown. But instead, I am just going to be covering the 6 different lists. So up first, we do have the red Kenshin list from Milo. And again, this one is pretty standard, at least from what we've seen or expected to see going into this format, right? The biggest thing is just understanding that we have some of the bigger bodies. Again, the 3K Kenshin can do a lot of work for being defensive early. And then the Kamiya just provides a lot of value in both forms of her for getting extra draw, extra filtering, extra double energy, and just really does a lot for the deck. So this is definitely going to be a meta staple that I expect that we're going to see a lot more of in the near future. Because again, the biggest, aspect here in terms of what you're being aggressive against, you are having the option to just disrupt a lot of double energy, or I should say high energy requirement decks that have a lot of double energy, that if you push back one of their raid targets into their energy line, that can be a big deal. So I do think that we might see Lancelot start to fall off a little bit just with respects to this deck being so popular, and instead maybe going back to the rise of Squad Zero, because if you are able to get the stage online for Squad Zero and you're getting all the extra early removal, you will chip away at this deck and run them out of resources quite quickly, honestly. So this could be a point where we see more people swapping to Squad Zero as a way to counter this deck overall. I would say, and again, as someone who's not had a lot of time to test this matchup personally yet, I'd imagine Squad Zero is going to be the best counter to this deck, just how naturally it wants to work with the extra card advantage and having, up to 16 removal if you really want to go the distance on it. So we'll have to wait and see where that lands, but I think Squad Zero would still be the best place to start overall. Now, again, I do know at the time of recording this that the SR prices were still pretty crazy for this deck, making it definitely a more expensive option. I hope that with the rare battles coming up, very soon, that we'll have more of those in circulation so people will have an easier time. For me personally, I have my starter decks on the side, but I did not pick up my SRs in time, so I might try to get some rare battle ones just for the sake of having them and having the deck complete, right? But we'll have to wait and see. So not much more to say about this list in particular. I think it was definitely the boogeyman of the format going in, and I would not be surprised if over half the field at the core TCG Regional was this deck, just because there was so much hype around it and so many people knowing going into the event that it would be the deck to play and the deck to beat. And sometimes you just get the surprise of people not knowing how the new deck works or how to counter it, and that can give you a lot of free wins. And spoiler, just to, count ahead for it, I would fully expect the yellow Kaiju number 8 deck to steal a lot of free games because people don't know what it does yet. So again, it's kind of to be expected when we have new lists like this pop up that people haven't had a lot of time to play test against. Exactly the same thing happened with Roy Mustang, right? So we'll have to wait and see what the end of the month gives us. But until then, congrats to Milo, who was our core TCG champion. Moving on from there, we have Nami Lover in second place with the Roy Mustang deck. And again, the biggest highlight for me personally is that when we actually look at the, top 4 lists that we have here, there's quite a bit of diversity in terms of what was able to do well in the tournament. So I am happy to see that Roy Mustang, or again, I know a lot of people call it the Ryza deck because she's the more important of the two for how important it is for the deck overall to function. But Roy Mustang continues to be a favorite in the North American meta, which surprisingly has not been doing well at all in the JP format, and it continues to kind of just fall behind in general. But I think that speaks more to the overall power level and kind of where things are at on the JP side. And again, goes back to the note here around wanting to catch us up and get some more of those decks into our meta, just to, make future set releases more streamlined and hopefully getting sets at the same time for NA and JP. Now, the thing to note here is that as it stands today, and especially looking ahead for our future set releases, I do think that this is a deck that carries itself quite well all the way through the rest of the year and most likely into next year as well, because it is a very strong contention. Now, again, for me personally, I would put this at 1.5 at best. I still do not think it is as good as half of the room being on this list, but it is still a very popular IP, and it is one that people enjoy playing. So I would not be surprised at all to see more of this in the future as more players lean into, again, their favorite IP choices and just being an overall very solid deck. So this one is all about being low to the ground and aggressive with some additional removal. However, this has the downside compared to Squad Zero, as it doesn't have as much refilling of your hand that we would normally like to see. Now, with that in mind, there might actually be a case here that if you are expecting a lot of Kenshin and you want to try to align for more removal, you could actually add the blue event card here to get the extra draw for when your hand is completely empty. But I think that is still a overall risky play to make, and definitely going to be one that is a all-in meta call if it is worth it or not. So definitely keep that in mind, but definitely something that could make a splash in this deck depending on how your local meta is going. Moving on from there, we have the Silto deck in third, and this is one that I'm glad made it as far as it did, and definitely third is a good spot here, because I think there was not a lot of hype for this deck, and maybe somewhat to be fair, right? It is just another purple deck that does purple things while drawing extra cards and using your graveyard or sideline to get extra value back. But I really do think that Silto, even if he does cost 6 energy, the fact that you're able to get that additional snipe and attack for a turn and then still naturally having impact on top of it is just a very good removal option to have. And this is one that I think plays quite well into the current format, just because you are able to get that snipe effect and be very careful about how you want to remove your opponent's cards or interact with your opponent's boards, right? You're very easy to set up a Silto in the back to be a raid fodder when you really need it. Now, the one thing I will say is that from an overall defensive raid option, right? Sure, you can get the nullify impact for the other one. This doesn't lend itself too well because you want to give it the when played for this turn. So that is the one possible downside that I will add here, but it does have all the drawing, all the filtering, all the, color triggers for relevant stuff that we would want out of our graveyard. It is really just kind of like the next evolution for purple decks that we would expect, but with a extra raid here in the fact with the 6 energy version, giving you the extra removal that is always very nice to see. So again, as I kind of always bring up in these videos, when you have a raid target that can act as the extra removal, it is very important. And when you have a deck that just does so much extra filtering and drawing, or I should say searching in this case, like this one does, that it's going to be very easy to find that reloopable removal when you really need it and continuously set your opponent back a turn, right? Especially in best of one, consistency really does matter. So again, huge shout here to Mike with 3rd place with the Silto deck. Now going into 6th, we have the good old Renji Rush, making another appearance. And I want to give a shout out because they're continuously doing well with this deck. But, the Renji Rush is one that is here to keep the format honest, if nothing else. Getting the damage to body and sometimes just having that 4K early is really nice, but it's also worth noting here that if we think about the 3K BP removal, the Renji here actually does get a little bit extra value for how this lines up into the Kenshin meta and how those cards want to rely on a 3K body on the front line. So Renji here is actually playing a more removal focused role than we might have seen with some of the other style of decks come up in the field. So there's actually like a little bit of a plus there for Renji. Now that aside, for those who are maybe unfamiliar, this deck still is really all in on I just want to slam 4K bodies on the board and be aggressive. And it turns out that is still perfectly fine. Now, the nice thing about this is because of both the Renji and the Ichigo, we still have defensive raid options, which are very good to hit on our opponent's turn. And again, Renji actually getting a lot of value here coming out of life with the 3K being extremely relevant, especially as the meta goes more to a lower of the ground in respects to the red Kenshin deck, which is then forcing out things like the Lancelot. So it's really cool to see how the meta just keeps shifting and how we might want to have some of these other meta considerations that, again, this deck did not change since, a year ago now. All things considered, other than the new Ichigo, fine. It's just a different 4K, right? But the Renji here is kind of this interesting story where it was really good early on in Union Arena for popping 3Ks, kind of fell off as we got more into the 4K raid style of meta, and now is suddenly potentially really good, if not better than it was at the beginning of Union Arena for a card that does not change at all. So I will not go as far to say is that like, hey, let's bring Genthru back, right? Because it's a 3500, it can fill the same role as Renji. I'm not going to go that far, okay? Trust me, I understand the risky dice, as much as I love that deck, is not going to be as good because a lot of the power in this really comes back to the consistency pieces while also being able to swing for 4Ks very quickly. So definitely want to give a shout out to our 6th place player here for keeping everybody honest, getting the Renji Rush back into the top 8 as it was here, because it is just a very solid deck. And again, something to consider. Cards like Renji getting a little bit more value for how the meta might be shifting. So be it a meta call or be it just responding to your local meta, cards that pop 3Ks might actually be making a good spot here in the near future. Now moving on to our top 16th. In 15th, we have the Lancelot deck, and this one is no surprise for a lot of people because it did just do well coming out of the Dallas Regional, and then also Lancelot is just going to be a very good deck. This is one that I'm very curious to see how the meta respects overall when we have things like Kenshin, which can be really good at disrupting the double energy plan, but we do have the Glaucaster, which allows us to play the Nunnally to the back line to make sure that we can still consistently get up to that 8 energy. So the one thing I do want to note here is that I do think this is going to fundamentally change the sequencing of your turns and how you're aligning those double energy plays. with respect to, again, Kenshin pushing stuff to your backline if you need to. But we do have the added benefit here is that if we can get a 5K online, that can also be a very real problem for our opponent. And then also just Lancelot Air Cavalry is an insane card, right? Once you get up to that threshold. So if your Kenshin opponent does get a little bit of a slower start and you're able to stick some of those 5Ks to, get the free block when you really need it, and then get, pressure back with a damage too, it's going to feel very real. And there is an opportunity here, again, because the Glaucaster makes it where we are a turn faster than we were previously. I still think that this is a very, very good deck to be playing in the current meta. So definitely do not sleep on Lancelot. I think this is still a good deck. And if you are someone who is, looking forward to future regionals, again, I think this is still one of the better decks to play because you have the additional consistency with your energy line, thanks to the extra 0 draw and filtering that we got, thanks to the Glaucaster now hitting the Nunnally. And again, just having those 5K blockers can be very important to help stabilize for a turn. So congrats to Ryza in 15th with the green Lancelot deck. This is one that I definitely would expect to see in future metas. And then, of course, our good old boy Sukuna here at 24th. Again, I think this is overall just a very fine deck. It is one that is, in my opinion, not going anywhere anytime soon. I think this is still just the, keep them honest format style, but getting the extra draw off the Sukuna's finger, opting for the freeze Sukuna, I think is also a very nice meta choice here to consider. But again, like the raid Yuji is just still very good with the disruption that it wants to be doing, as well as giving us a 4K defensive option out of life, that this deck still has a lot of room to grow in it. And, eventually we're going to get a volume 3, right, for JJK. So this is one that I'm still would recommend sleeving up and knowing how to test against it. Now, if you've been playing Union Arena for a while, I'm sure you've seen this deck 1,000 times at this point, but I think there's also a consideration to be made here for the Nanami plan, right? Still being another option because getting the ability to rest some stuff down can be nice. Now, again, the downside is if we're thinking about a lot of Kenshin decks, then you don't get the, when sideline trigger. So it does act as a little bit of a counter to that. So again, at least for the Kenshin, the immediate Kenshin, I should say, impact, I definitely like going back to the Sukuna and all-in Yuji and going for the freeze effect. But as we think about the meta going into the end of this month with Yu Yu Hakusho and Kaiju 8 being some very heavy hitters to look forward to, I'm very curious to see which blue JJK deck is the most popular, because I think you have to build two very different ways depending on how relevant specifically Red Kenshin is going to be going forward. Now, again, I think Red Kenshin is still very good and will still be a meta call, but will we see more of the shiny new toy syndrome like we've seen for this meta, or will things kind of even out as we get even more sets later on this month? We will have to wait and see. So with that is a quick recap of our top 32 breakdown, looking at the core TCG regional. Again, over 240 players came out and battled it out in this best of one battle, and just I look forward to so much having Swiss going into a top cut in future events. But again, all these are leading up to the North American finals, but all that starts with going to your regionals, getting ready, sleeving up, and hopefully getting those invites for the event that's going to take place in Vegas. So again, let me know your thoughts. Are you a fan of the Kenshin decks? Do you think it is just going to be a flavor of the month thing and we'll see things kind of diverge back to how it was at the Dallas Regional? Or are we just going to see the endless wave of Kenshin taking over the format? Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments below. But until next time, my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.